that we even have a United States president who essentially dodged the draft. So it's shameful, in my view, on his part to even want to consider leading this nation, considering he is the commander-in-chief. I want to introduce to you a special guest that has come here all the way from Texas. And Jose Sierra Jr.
Yes,
is here. And just a little bit about Jose. I want to introduce you to him as we get a little bit political tonight. I intentionally chose September 11th, Patriots Day, to have Jose Sierra Jr. as a guest to discuss and expose how the United States government does not honor the Guadalupe Hidalgo Treaty or other Native American treaties for that matter. Y ya es tiempo.
Ya es tiempo.
And Jose's core concept of two countries, one lie, is to unify persons of Mexican-American heritage along with anyone who has an interest in this cause, beginning with Texas and eventually beyond to other states to form a large coalition of registered voters. Welcome to the show, Jose.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Tell us what you're about.
It's interesting that I'm here in Phoenix because I've been out here very many times. So when I got the invitation by Dee Dee to come out, I just jumped at it. Right now, we are our organization, Two Countries, One Lie, is out in Texas, and we are also in New Mexico, spreading the word of how the United States defrauded the Mexican Americans in 1941 out of reparations that were supposed to be given to the families of the lands of the Tejanos, of the original land grantees. There's 433 original land grantees in Texas. Those were the Spanish and Mexican land grants, the King of Spain, and those were awarded to Tejanos like my ancestors. My ancestor owned the largest land grant in South Texas, 605,000 acres. His name was Jose Narcisco Cavazos. And right now, I've been working for the last 30, 40 years on researching, and since I retired in 2003, I have stepped it up and found many, many important items that need to be brought to the surface. The key to this is the United States has created a situation where they needed to use our Tejano ancestors, and they used them as pawns in a tremendous treaty in 1941, where they took the reparations of $193 million. In today's money, that would be $4 to $10 billion that were supposed to have come to our ancestors of Texas. The problem is they gave the money to Mexico, and Mexico kept the money. So this is part of the job that we have, is to educate and unite Tejanos and Mexican Americans all over the United States, including Arizona, California, New Mexico, and especially Texas, and there's other states that are involved with these Spanish and Mexican land grants. So we're working on this to expose the fraud that was created and done, and the reasons why. If you have a Spanish last name and your mother and grandmother or father and grandfather were born in the United States, then more than likely you are connected to a land grant. I know you don't know it because the United States did a good job of denying us the ability to have our records and keep all of this information, so it would be important to the families and the descendants. But 37 courthouses in Texas were burned down over 60 years to destroy records by the Anglos. And that's why we have gente perdida. We have a lot of people that don't know their past because they can't connect the dots. And it's not their fault. This is institutionalized prejudice from the state of Texas and the United States. And it was designed that way so you would not be able to know the truth. And that's what I have discovered. I'm working right now with a few people. I have a couple of attorneys, and I have a large following of professors that are all starting to see what I have brought to the surface. And what we're telling people is things that have never been known. But here's the question I ask for all you Tejanos and Mexicanos out there, that, again, either if your mother and father or your mother and grandfathers are born in the United States, you probably don't know you belong to a Spanish or Mexican land grant. But the reality of it is this: if we didn't know, why didn't they tell us? Why didn't they tell us in 1941 they were going to give reparations? Why were we the invisible minority in this country? Why did they treat us this way? Why didn't we have the right to know that this was being used in Mexico on our behalf, and Mexico was undeniably being set up for what I call a scam or a ruse with the United States? When they gave the money to Mexico, there was no instructions on how to give the reparations to the Tejanos or the Mexican people. So they kept the money. And all the way up to 1970, they said they were going to pay it. And there's documentation for that. They were going to repay all of the Tejanos that were given the reparations. And the reality of it is this: there was no instructions of when or how to give them the money. So in 1989, finally the government of Mexico said that they would never pay the Tejanos the money. So there was two court battles, one in 1984, and that was called the Asociación de Reclamación. And that was a lady named Aminta Zarate out of Edinburgh, Texas. She filed a lawsuit, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. It was against Mexico, and the court ruled that it was not the jurisdiction of the United States, because Mexico was a sovereign government. So they basically dismissed the case. Well, there was another lawsuit filed in 1994 on this issue to recover the money that the United States gave Mexico. So all this is documented. All this is well known. This historical information is in the archives. You can find it. But most people don't even know what I'm talking about, because they didn't want you to know. They didn't want people to be aware of what they had done. This was a systematic, institutionalized prejudice to keep the Tejanos from getting what they were supposed to get in fairness. The reality of it is this: in 1994, it was called the Texas Alliance of Land Grant Descendants, was filed in federal district court. And at that time, the court was proceeding with this, and it was the lawyer that was involved with it was Stephen J. Schneebly out of Miami. And he's a professor now at the University of Miami of Law School. And they had listened to the case, but failed to rule on it because they said it was a breach of the statute of limitations. And that's where we are today. We're being blocked by the United States government, by the statute of limitations, to get justice, to allow us to have our day in court, to prove that we were used as a scam in 1941 to allow Mexico to keep the money so it would in favor Mexico with the United States against Nazi Germany. 1941 wasn't 100 years ago. It was 75, 77, 72 years ago. But the reality of it is none of us knew. Why not? Why didn't they tell us that this happened? Why are there two federal lawsuits that nobody even knows about or understands? Why are we the second-class citizens that never get treated like American citizens do or should be treated? Why does the Mexicano, why does the Tejano, why do we always have to fight for something? And it's so, the indignity to this is that we were U.S. citizens when this happened. So we're fighting to tell the truth, and we're fighting for us Tejanos to finally stand up for our rights, to understand that this is a fight for all of us, and not only you, but your children and your future children. You were robbed of it. Basically, this is our quest right now in Texas.
Jose, I know I've listened to your speeches that you've given in Texas on the Senate floor, you know, the speeches that you've given in various venues. And one of the things that intrigued me is how you honed in on the courthouses that were burned down. Can you expand on that and why Raza should be concerned about that, and why they should do some research in, with regard to Familia in Texas and the land titles or land grants for that matter? Can you expound?
I'm glad you brought that back. The reason they were done like that is because in 1848, when the Anglos had taken and bought the land from Mexico, this part of Texas was called Tejas, Tejas, and they were part of Mexico. There was no courthouses. There was no records. The only thing that people had was little documents that were original documents from the King of Spain or from the Mexican government that said they owned the land. At that time in 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo had, I think, 23 articles. And those 23 articles were the rules and guidelines of the purchase of Texas and established to make it American, United States. The problem with that is these rules had three primary rules that spotlighted the Mexican American people at the moment in time. And that is Article 8, Article 9, and Article 10. What happened is William Trist was the representative for the American government. He got a deal set with the Mexican government and took it back to the United States to have it ratified. In 1848, they needed 66% of the Senate to ratify that treaty. When they read the treaty, they were immediately aroused and upset because Article 8 and 9 were protections and guidelines for the Mexican Americans that lived on the land. They did not like it. They did not like that there were stipulations in there for protection for the Mexican American or the Mexican national at that time. Article 10 was an honor and guarantee to the land grants. And they immediately said, there's no way we're going to honor and guarantee any Mexicans. You have to understand the time. In 1848, the country had just ended a war with Mexico, and they hated Mexicans. And they hated the Mexicans that owned those lands. They didn't want the Mexicans. They wanted the lands. So your ancestors and my ancestors were they were helpless. They were victimized by those two countries because they made a deal that wasn't in their best interest. When they made the deal and changed the Article 8 in charge and changed Article 9 and softened them to make them easier prey for the Mexicans to lose their land, Article 10 was deleted. Article 10 was the honor and guarantee of Mexican land grants and Spanish land grants. So they got that passed in the United States, but it wasn't the same treaty anymore. Mexico didn't know they changed it until 1855, and that was called the Protocol of Carretera. Carretera is a town in Mexico, and the United States and Mexico met there in 1855, and Mexico demanded to know why the United States changed the language in the treaty without notifying Mexico. And the United States told them that basically the Congress was uneasy and uncertain about how to deal with the Mexican population at that time, but they would not be able to honor and guarantee their safety and their well-being on those lands in 1848. And so they deleted Article 10 and changed Article 9 completely. So the bottom line is they wanted to soften it to make it easier to get the lands for the Mexicans. Again, they hated the Mexicans. They just got done with a war from 1846 to 1848 with Mexicans. They had no liking for Mexicans. So it was a setup to allow them to control the land in the favor that they wanted. To give you a little taste of one law that was passed in 1855 in California, it was called the Greaser Act. The Greaser Act in 1855 was a vagrancy law that was passed by California, but it was targeting Mexicans as Indian and Indian blood and Mexican blood. And they knew these people. They did not like them. They did not want them. They just wanted their land. That law basically said that Mexicans could be arrested and thrown in jail just because they were Mexican or if they thought they were Indian. In those days, just to tell you, Dee Dee, You had to prove who you were. Unfortunately, it was usually the color of their skin. If you were whiter, you would be allowed to do certain things, but if you were dark, like a lot of Mexicanos are, they worked against them and they were denied the ability to become citizens. So this institutionalized prejudice had been going on, and it was hot and heavy in the 1850s. Unfortunately, it just set back all of our brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers, all of our families, and it made it even more difficult. Go ahead.
Yeah, we're going to go on break. Our producer's going to give us a 30-second break. If you have any questions for Jose Sierra Jr., please call 480-519-1179. Thank you. We'll be back after the break.
Estamos en Frecuencia Alterna, tu espacio en radio. Regresamos.
Fire Nightclub. Frecuencia Alterna Radio presenta. Desde la República Hermana de las Tranzas, el conjunto Nueva Ola. Viernes 15 de septiembre en Empire Nightclub, 51 Avenida y Maridao. Cumbia, rock, chelas y el conjunto Nueva Ola. A 3 caídas y sin límite de tiempo. Lucha Libre Mexicana. Venta de boletos y mesas VIP al 480-848-4323. Viernes 15 de septiembre en Empire Nightclub. Frecuencia Alterna Radio presenta el grito de independencia de México.
Y que retumbe tus centros la cumbia.
All right, welcome back to the Tequila Onda show. With me is a guest, a very special guest, all the way from Texas. His name is Jose Sierra Jr. And again, if you have any questions for him with regard to the grants that belong to Mexican Americans, specifically in Texas, give us a call at 480-519-1179. And just before we go back to what Jose was saying, one of the things that I want to highlight, given that it's Patriots Day, September 11th, had it not been for Mexico notifying the United States government with regard to Nazi Germany's intent to invade us from the south, we would have been in a world of hurt. So we've got an excellent neighbor. We've always been really good neighbors. Unfortunately, Donald Trump is on the wrong path. But back to Jose, back to the subject matter of the injustice against our people.
Okay, thank you. What am I talking about? Where am I going with this? Well, basically, I'm trying to tell you that there's a story here. There's actually a story of intrigue that no one knows about. When we've done our research here in the last 20, 30 years, we did research to find out, why was this done? Why did Mexico receive $193 million that was supposed to have come to the Tejanos or the Mexicans? And why did Mexico keep the money? What was it all about? Well, if you do enough research, and right now I am in contact with the archives, National Archives in Washington, D.C., you could find there's a lot of smoking guns that we're starting to unveil now. We have a couple of attorneys and we have a couple of professors that we're working with right now that is going to make it more difficult for the United States to say, oh, this is an old case, this is ancient, nobody cares about this. We care. I care. That's why we are going to have the truth told. It's just a matter of time before we put this together and show this before a court. The reality of it is this: they are very deceptive how they deal with us, the United States, and including Texas. They don't want you to know the truth. They want you to stay right where you're at, and they have put you down for long enough where they're figuring, you won't really care. Well, you know what? That's changing. Because my target is for the young. I want the young to know about who they are, where they came from, and why is this happening to us as a people. And I think right now, if you sort of look at this as a trail of evidence, Mexico was sort of courted to become more of an ally. That's why they used us. So when Germany was starting to make the move, Mexico was the #2 supplier of oil in the world in 1938. And it was the oil that the Nazis wanted. So they made deals with Mexico. Well, the United States knew that was there and it was happening. And they said they had to do something to stop Mexico from becoming an ally with Nazi Germany. There are books that are just coming out now, excellent books. I've got about half a dozen or so that I'm involved with right now that I'm taking research from. And what they said was that this all happened because of the strategy in the United States and in the world against Nazi Germany. Now, in 1938, Lázaro Cárdenas nationalized the oil wells and the oil in Mexico. And all the American and British companies that were in there pumping oil were told to get out. They got out. They were thrown out for a reason. Is because they were being unfair to the Mexican workers. They were cheating them out of their money, and Lázaro Cárdenas had enough. So when he filed a lawsuit, and what happened is he filed a lawsuit in the Supreme Court of Mexico, and he won. He won. When he told the oil companies that they had to pay, they refused. And he told them the only thing you're allowed to do is leave this country with just the shirts on your back and leave all the equipment here. They were furious. They went back to the United States and they wanted a war with Mexico. There was a man at that time, the State Department. His name was Cordell Hull. He was FDR's right-hand man, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And he demanded that the United States go to war in 1938 against Mexico. And right that moment, he was caught in a trap because his State Department was calling for a war with Mexico, and Winston Churchill was telling them, do something about Mexico because it's giving oil to the Nazis. And in 1938, nobody was at war with Germany yet except for Czechoslovakia. So Churchill was telling FDR, you've got to do something about Mexico. And then he's got the oil companies wanting a war with Mexico. So he was compelled to do something with Mexico, but he didn't know what to do. Well, he went back and he talked to his people. There was 3 men that were primarily involved. Cordell Hull, Secretary of State, Sumner Welles, the Undersecretary of State, and Josephus Daniels, the Ambassador to Mexico. Those 3 men were literally the ones that had to come up with a plan to figure out how to get an oil bailout, because that's what this was all about. It was an oil bailout. The oil companies demanded a bailout. They wanted money or they wanted the oil back in 1938. So he had to come up with a plan. And the plan they came up with was because of the 1923 convention. The 1923 convention was an agreement by the United States and Mexico to compensate all Tejanos that had lost their lands because of the Anglos that stole their lands in the early late 1800s. And that was Richard King, Mr. Charles Stillman, and also a man named Mifflin Kennedy, the most powerful people in Texas who had stolen most of that land. Was it legal now? Yeah, it's legal now. But they were either forced off their lands, intimidated off their lands, cheated off their lands, squatted off their lands. The poor Tejanos did not have a chance. They were victimized by these Anglos at the time, and if the Tejanos and Mexicanos resisted, they were literally dealt with. So as you can see, it was very difficult. But at the same time, it was the way the future would be. And within one generation, 95% of all the land in Texas that belonged to Tejanos y Mexicanos was lost to the Anglos. I don't know if anyone understands this history as well as I do, because I've read so many books and I've seen so many documents. But the average person doesn't understand the injustice, the magnitude of the injustice, because this was all done for the oil companies. And here we are, 100 years later, 70 years later, and here we are, the oil companies are still at the main spot where everybody has to do something for the oil companies. They were very powerful then, and they're very powerful now. What I ask is this. This is our plea. We ask the United States and Texas to remove the statute of limitation of the 1941 convention and allow us to have our day in court. I ask the Congress of the United States, I ask anybody that's involved with the political system, either a representative or a senator or a state representative or state senator, I ask them for their help to write a bill to ask the Congress to look at the 41 convention and have a congressional investigation. I will testify there myself if I get a chance, and I'll tell you the real truth of what went down. Unfortunately, they don't want you to know. They don't want to open it up. Why? Because it would be the biggest scandal ever exposed in U.S. history, where they took a whole generation of Mexican Americans and literally defrauded them because of the ulterior gains of a strategic world against the Germans. Excuse me.
Well, the other day when we visited before the show, you did this diagram, and one of the things that impressed upon me that one night was you feel with regard to the grants frauded as a people, as Tejanos, or more, it's in the millions.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. We estimate there's probably around 10 million Tejanos. I'm sorry, 5 million Tejanos and another 5 million descendants of Spanish and Mexican land grants, because you have to include California, you have to include New Mexico, you have to include Arizona, Texas, and there's other states that are involved with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. So if you take all of those people and you multiply them generation after generation, there's about 10 million altogether. I estimate about 3 to 5 million Tejanos alone just in our state. So this is a big issue. This is a country-wide issue of Mexican Americans that were displaced and defrauded out of their rights and their future because of a government that used them as pawns. And that's the sin to me. And this is the problem with us, is identifying this and getting it out to the rest of the people so they know that this is an issue. That, this is an issue that should be dealt with everywhere by all Tejanos. The conversation needs to start now, and it needs to be opened up for a lot of people. So hopefully we can get that word across, and we can do something with this.
Now, I just kind of want to reiterate the purpose of Jose being here on this show, traveling all the way from Texas, is to give you the information. Raza, we need to know more about the fraud that's taken place against us. Bottom line, we owned all of this land, and the government, the way is by burning down courthouses, getting rid of evidence of the records. Fraud us. Language that was spoken in the 1930s was Spanish. So what would the government do? They would do everything in English. And that was the biggest loophole. And I believe, and I talked to you about this, with regard to the 1941 statute of limitations, I think it goes beyond that, because when they sort of insert a language barrier, they're intentionally, so that people really don't know what's going on unless it's translated. I think there's got to be something there where the arc of justice is going to bend in our favor.
They did nothing to help you. They obstructed everything. They didn't want you to get smarter. They didn't want you to know the language. That's why I'm asked today, when I go all over the place in Texas and New Mexico, and I speak this whole presentation about this fraud that was perpetrated on us. The first thing they tell me is, well, aren't you worried about getting killed? Aren't you worried about dying? And I tell them all the same thing. I said, this is why I'm putting this all on recorded tapes and CDs. I said, because you have to be able to understand that there are people out there that will stop anyone that tries to tell the truth. And I'm doing the best I can to get the word out. And I've got a large family who all know what I know. They can kill the dreamer, but they can't kill the dream. And that's what I'm trying to do, is allow our people to understand and know what really happened. They have a right to it. They need to understand that, because this was an injustice. This was something that was done as a race of people. We were treated unbelievably terribly by the U.S. government and also the state of Texas. They're culpable in this also. But I want to say this to you. If anyone can recall, around 1972, there was a man named Daniel Inouye. He was the senator out of Hawaii. He was approached by the Japanese people who wanted to talk about the injustice of the 1941 till 1945 internment camps of the Japanese American citizens. I hope you all remember that era. It's well known in the United States history, but it's not very well known that the United States never dealt with Mexico or Mexicans in the same manner. They did things wrong to us, but they never gave us the same justice that they gave those people. The reality of it was this: in 1988, Ronald Reagan and the Congress gave $20,000 of reparations to each Japanese American that was interned, and at the same time apologized to them for the injustice that was done. We never got an injustice. Nobody ever told us they were sorry that they cheated us and robbed us and lied to us. This is an injustice that goes beyond any book that you can read. Our history has never been told. And thank God we got people like you, Didi, that come out here and they allow us this little moment out here to give us a rare look at the real story. And this is what we're doing. Do I know all the facts? Not yet, but I'm scratching the surface and I'm digging deep. I need other people to also get involved. I go to all kinds of lectures with professors, and they turn around and they don't even know what I know. And I tell them all, I said, this is important for us as a people. We need to know the truth. La verdad. That's
right.
What we're looking for.
And with that, the producer's going to go on a quick 1-minute break, and we will be back with Jose Sierra Jr. Thank you.
Estamos en Frecuencia Alterna, tu espacio en radio. Regresamos.
Planear tu futuro financiero.
Okay, welcome back to the Tequila Onda show. Right now with us is Jose Sierra Jr., all the way from Texas. And he's a Tejano who is fighting injustice with what occurred and what happened to Tejano and Mexican American families regarding Spanish and Mexican land grants. There are 433 of them. But one of the questions from our audience, and thank you for asking questions. They want to know where you're from.
I am from Illinois, and I was born in Far, Texas. And my mom and dad would go with the Piscas, and we wound up traveling all the way across all the Midwestern states to follow the fruit and the vegetables. And my father wound up staying in Illinois because he found a job as a truck driver. So even though we were all born in Texas, we all wound up in Illinois, and that's where I reside now.
Okay. I think that's the only question so far. Yo quiero. ¿Hay otro? Let's see. Well, Oscar Quesada, shout out to him. He says great passion and extremely necessary history to be remembered. So thank you for your comments. Let's go back to the 433. You've got a tattoo on your arm.
Yeah,
one says
sure.
Tejano, and the other one says?
433 land grants, Texas. And that's the symbol that I have to show that this part of history for Tejanos and Mexican Americans is lost. Why? Because no one even knew there was 433 land grants in Texas. But it is documented, it is recorded, it is part of our history. Very few people even see a lot of these documents or even understand. But we need all of our college kids that are Tejanos, Mexicanos, they need to start understanding that they need to find out not only who they are, but where did they come from. And our kids, I've been all over. I've gone to universities there. I've been on the campuses of Texas University. I've been to Texas A&M. I've been to University of Texas. And I realized that most of our kids are not really in tune with our history. They haven't got a clue, most of them, of where they came from, who they are. I mean, I hate to say it, but they're more worried about what color their Mustang is going to be than where they came from. So we're working on them because they're the future. And I want them to know their past. I want them to know and recognize who they are. We need to, as a people, we need to unite, and we need to get together and literally bring this level to a new high so we can talk to each other with dignity and respect, and not just that we are Mexicans. And unfortunately, Donald Trump has done us a very big disservice. And I know that a lot of you are sensitive about this issue, but when you walk in the streets of either where I come from in Texas, and you are looked at by the Anglos, they look at you as a Mexicano, but they always associate you with an illegal. We're just as legal as anybody else in this country. We are U.S. citizens that are Mexican descent. But unfortunately, when you have a president that paints you with a broad brush, that everybody that's Mexican is illegal, everybody that's Mexican is a killer, everybody that's a Mexican is bad, well then you know what? He's not doing a service to the Mexican-American community in the United States, who he represents. So this is an injustice, and not enough people are talking about it. I don't hear the Castro brothers out of Texas talking about it. I don't hear other politicians that are Mexican descent or even Latin American descent, Cubanos y Puertorriqueños. I don't hear them talking about it. Why is it such a amazing disgrace that we are entitled to have as Mexican Americans, and it's more abusive than anything else? It's not fair to us. We're human beings, and we are American citizens. We have the same rights every other American has.
Okay, so we have John on the line who has a question. Go ahead, John. Can you hear us, John? Hello? Okay, well, John, I think we lost you. So
Technical difficulty.
Technical difficulties. Keep trying. So back to 1938. Obviously, we know how oil-rich Texas is, and
well, here's another part of it, and I'll help you out a little bit. In 1923, when they came up with the fair market value of my ancestors' lands, 433 land grants were judged by the fair market analysts that they had brought to this treaty between Mexico and the United States, because they knew they had done the Tejanos wrong. So they wanted to come up with a number. They decided that the fair market value at that time was $193 million for all of the land that the Tejanos owned. Well, here's the problem. In 1923, there was oil, but they didn't even consider the oil. So the bottom line is they need to redo that whole thing and evaluate it the way it should have been done with all mineral rights. Go ahead.
Okay, so we've got Paul? We've got Paul on the line. Paul, go ahead and ask your question. I hope you can hear us, and let's hear you.
Okay, I don't really have a question, but I'm going to contribute a little bit here if I can. You were kind of correct on why they burned the courthouses. It was to destroy the chain of custody, which is basically the chain of title is held in those courthouses, and so were the Mexican documents at the time. There was a process created by the United States government and under the Surveyor General's office on how to patent land grant, and some of the land grants in New Mexico were patented, but not in their totality. And what I mean by that is some land grants were granted by Spain or Mexico, like let's say San Miguel del Vado had 360,000 acres, and they only got 5,000 acres. Stuff like that was what took place a lot. But I would say that if we took this thing to court, it would probably be the biggest, largest child abuse case ever in history, ever, because they're not abusing me, kind of like Jose says, and Jose knows who I am. We presented together at different places, and he's a good friend of mine. He had, if you're going to listen to a story, you got to listen to Jose's. But basically, every child that is born as an heir to a land grant and is denied the right to be on that land, to benefit from that land, okay, to be raised on that land, to have his freedom on that land, is being abused, okay? And they're being abused by the United States government. For instance, our titles are written in perpetuity, which means forever and ever. We're kind of like a stop sign. Once they put up a stop sign, they never take it down, okay? So lately, some of our land was added to a national monument, kind of like a conservation area. And one of the senators from here from New Mexico, Senator Heinrich, got up and said that he wanted this monument to be set up in perpetuity. But part of the land that he's trying to claim is ours, entitled through patent in perpetuity. A patent that was surveyed by the New Mexico Surveyor General, surveyed by the United States Surveyor General, approved by Congress and signed by a president. We're talking a greater patent than anything Kellogg's Corn Flakes or Pepsi Cola has.
Thank you, Paul.
Now, the other part of that is what he's talking about now. Our equal protection under the law is guaranteed under the 14th Amendment. As human beings, ma'am. Okay, so like DACA and all this other stuff, immigration law, you need to talk to me about all this stuff. I've been talking about this since 2008. I wrote a letter to President Obama. I'd like to read it on your program sometime. Jose knows how to get a hold of me, but there's some heavy stuff that's taking place right now. If you look at what's happening to America, it's basically falling apart. Do you understand why?
I do. I do understand.
It's the whore of Babylon. It's the whore of Babylon, ma'am, and it's being attacked by God himself. He's going to destroy it. Because if you look at America, it's in bed with every nation.
Well, yeah, and thank you again for the call, and I know that we're spiritually broken, and I hope you call again, but I want to go ahead and allow Jose Sierra to respond to you. Thank you again for the call. Go ahead.
Thank you, Paul, for that information. I appreciate it. I want to say this. Paul brought up a good point. Let me share with you. New Mexico is one of the leading states. California and New Mexico are the leading states who have tried to do things with land grants, Spanish or Mexican. They have had more progress in those two states than in any of the other states. The problem we have is the states like Texas. Texas is really against any exposure or announcement of some kind of justice. They do not want to allow us any type of venue to get justice in any way, shape, or form. Right now, Texas is struggling and battling against the Mexican people in Texas with the House Bill 724 and others, which is fighting mineral rights. And right now, it's almost impossible to get the mineral rights, the unclaimed mineral rights, that the little paltry amount of what we really had as oil that belonged to us, and they're just denying us any way they can and not allowing us justice in Texas. So there are some states that are moving forward. New Mexico has made a lot of gains, but Texas is the worst of the worst. They refused to be fair. They refused to allow Mexicanos to get justice. So this is why the fight for me is in Texas.
We're going to go on a quick 1-minute break. Our producer's going to take us on another break. And again, if you have any questions for Jose Sierra, our guest, the number is 480-519-1179. Thank you.
Los ritmos, desde Phoenix, Arizona, frecuencia alterna.
Hola, yo soy el poli, pero no de policía, así me lo pusieron mis cuates de...
Desde la República Hermana de las Tranzas, el conjunto Nueva Ola. Viernes 15 de septiembre en Empire Nightclub, 51 Avenida y McDowell. Cumbia, rock, chelas y el conjunto Nueva Ola. A 3 caídas y sin límite de tiempo. Lucha Libre Mexicana. Venta de boletos y mesas VIP al 480-848-4323. Viernes 15 de septiembre en Empire Nightclub. Frecuencia Alterna Radio presenta el grito de independencia de México.
All right, so welcome back to the Tequila Onda show. If you have any questions, call 480-519-1179 with regard to the Tejano injustices that are occurring and the fraud that took place against our people. And that's why Jose is here. He has about 40 years of research. So we're going to go back to Jose, and I'm getting a call from Two Bears. Do you want to segue into that, or?
Two Bears is calling in. He's the indigenous Indians out of, he's a tribal leader out there in San Antonio. And there's a big fight going on in San Antonio that they're waiting for me to come back. They have roughly 1,500 indigenous that are buried at the Alamo. And right now, the Alamo is in a war with the people of San Antonio, and they're trying to create business with renovation of the Alamo at the expense of the indigenous that are buried there. And this is the insult, again, that there is no sanctity for Mexicans. Only American Indians seem to have a higher regard. But when you mention that there's Mexican Indians, Mexican indigenous populations, then that's where they ignore us or they turn around and they deny it. And we as a people came from the indigenous people. We are indigenous people. Mexicans came from Mexico. If you think about it, the only thing in Mexico was the Aztecs and the Mayans. Well, if the American Indian movement was in the 1800s was in Texas, then we had nowhere to go. But nobody would allow us to move too far north because it was still part of Mexico. The only people that were our friends were Indians because the Anglos hated us. So what happened is Mexicanos wound up marrying Indians. And a lot of people don't know that that's our real history, that we have Indian blood.
I have a question from Miguel Sant. And he's asking, Jose, what type of legal recourse has been started in order to get this land recognized to its rightful owner? And thank you for asking that important question. Can you answer that?
Yeah, well, I'm going to reiterate. Right now, the United States is cleverly using one of its little stumbling blocks to keep us from getting justice with the statute of limitations. Because they know if they remove the statute of limitations, it's going to be the downfall of the United States because of the shame that they deserve for what they did to us. Unfortunately, I have been to 3 high-profile attorneys. I went to the attorney in Miami that I spoke of earlier who did the lawsuit in 1994. His name is Stephen J. Snavely, a real nice person. He's very amazing human being, and he's an intelligent. He graduated from Harvard. The guy's #1 in his class. He was cum laude. Very, very amazing human being. But even he couldn't beat the United States. They blocked him with the statute of limitations. And now we are dealing with a Phoenix attorney, and her name is Lana Markinson. She is an amazing attorney that is involved with Indian tribal lawsuits, and she fights for those poor indigenous people that can't fight for themselves. She is a noble lawyer, amazing human being who has really amazed me with a couple of landmark decisions in New Mexico that she has won at the Mexican Supreme Court, New Mexican Supreme Court. And then the third attorney, I won't mention his name because he's out of Washington, D.C. He's a high-powered attorney in Washington, D.C., probably in the top 3 of the constitutional lawyers in the United States. And him and I had a meeting, and we discussed this case. And the issue came up that he felt the only way to get justice was to petition the Congress and to get a bill written to have a what he called an investigation on the Treaty of 1941. So where are we right now? We are unable to get justice. But I will say this. There is something more amazing going on that no one knows about, but we are working on it. And I'm going to tell you what it is. Right now, the United States and Donald Trump are not doing well with Mexico and the president. The problem is it's NAFTA. Now, he has threatened, right now, he has threatened to take away NAFTA. If he does that, Mexico, I have talked to a senator in Mexico, and he has told me that they are going to retaliate. If Donald Trump does that, they're going to retaliate. Mexico will take the 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe and they will dissolve it. They will no longer exist against the United States. And also the conventions of 23 and 41 that are critical pieces that are blocking us from getting our day in court. If Trump does that NAFTA and he destroys NAFTA, there's going to be a trade war between Mexico and the United States, and it's possibly going to open the doors for a lot of us all over California, New Mexico, anybody that's involved with Spanish and Mexican land grants. It's going to be a hell of a moment for all of us to get justice.
Okay, well, we've got about a few more minutes left. Where can people find you, Jose, on the net? How can they contact you? Are you on social media? What's your phone number, your email?
We have a web page. It's twocountries1lie.com or Dos Países Una Mentira. And the reason we called it Two Countries, One Lie is obvious because the two countries made a treaty on behalf of our people, and the one lie that they made was that they allowed us in that treaty to become U.S. citizens. Well, that was a lie. They never gave us full rights and benefits of U.S. citizens. And to this day, we still struggle trying to get our identity and our constitutional rights from the United States. So my point to you is this issue is very important to all Mexican Americans and Tejanos. And our other Facebook page is Two Countries, One Lie, and you're welcome to come to that. We're constantly updating that and trying to explain the new strategies and what we are trying to do.
Now, back to the other question, if they have any legal questions with regard to the grants, is there a person, who is the person in Phoenix again, and who's a go-to person in Texas?
Okay, our attorney that we did not retain her. She's consulting us. Her name is Lana Markinson. She's an amazing constitutional lawyer here in Phoenix. And there are other groups, believe it or not, that are out there fighting for the same things we are. They're going in different directions than we are right now, but they all have the same issue. We may not agree with the other groups in Texas or New Mexico. One of them is a group from, it's actually from New Mexico, and that man's name is Frank Trujillo. We have his Facebook page here, Old Spanish and Mexican Land Grants. Go there, and he will let you know if you're in New Mexico. He'll let you know more about what's going on in New Mexico about Spanish and Mexican land grants. The key is to spread the word and start the conversation.
Okay, there you have it. We're going to wrap it up. Thank you for watching the Tequila Onda show with Jose Sierra, who has been talking about the injustices that has occurred against our people. And find him on Facebook. That's probably the easiest place to find him. If you go to my page, I've tagged him. This is an important subject matter. So until next time, thank you.
And thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So thanks again.
Música, todos los ritmos. Desde Phoenix, Arizona, Frecuencia Alterna.